Good afternoon. Thank you so much for our guests and for all the audience who's here. I'd like to introduce Dr. Desikachar first, and then I'll introduce Professor Paul Gilbert. Dr. Desikachar is the current successor of Vinaya Yoga tradition, and he's the chief yoga therapist. And Professor Paul Gilbert is the founder of Compassionate Mind and also a clinical psychologist at University of Derby. This initiative that I've started here is for, with an intention to help people to breathe when they're in the hospital on ventilators. So our intention here collectively is to be mindful that there are certain people who cannot breathe on their own. So we are collectively sending our breath to them. That is the initiative that I've started. Because my friend is in the hospital in the ICU currently, and I wanted to do something in a collective way. So the format today, what we'll be doing is I will start the session with my teacher chanting as we do in our tradition, and then I'll move on to questions with that I have for Dr. Desikachar and with Professor Gilbert on how to deal and any tips and strategies that they can offer us from their expertise on how to deal with the lockdown, and also coming out of this lockdown. How do we approach life? I think there is going to be a new normal that needs to be followed, and if there are any help or advice that they can give us. And how do we create that new normal for each one of us? And this time around, I have left about 10 to 15 minutes. If you have any questions from our experts here, you can raise your hand in this forum in Zoom. You can there's a place where you can raise your hand, and then I'll randomly pick people's. Apologies for those who I would miss, because we're here only for an hour, so I can't possibly get to everyone, but I'll do a lottery here. So if we can begin with Dr. Kaustav, if you can start the invocation, please.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Vidhi, for organizing this. And thank you, Professor Gilbert, for being a participant this time. It was so nice to meet you. So we'll begin with a chant that is honoring nature and peace. Shanno Mitra Sham Varunaha Shanno Bhavatvaryama Shanna Indro Brihaspatihi Shanno Vishnurokramaha Namo Brahmane Namaste Vayo Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahmasi Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahma Vadishyami Vratam Vadishyami Satyam Vadishyami Tanmam Avatu Tadvaktaram Avatu Avatu Mam Avatu Vaktaram Om Shanti 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 Namaste, friends. This chant basically is asking for all the elements in nature, like the wind, the water, the sun, the stars, to be very peaceful, because if they are not peaceful, we are not peaceful. And I think this is very relevant today when we talk about crises that are coming or affected by disturbances in nature. And the chant is also saying that nature is the God that we can see. Tvameva pratyaksham brahmasi. Nature, you are the divine that we can see. So we honor you. So it's a very beautiful chant about nature and different elements in nature. Namaste, friends, and welcome.
Thank you so much. I'd like to start with a question on from Professor Gilbert. I'm trying to unmute his audio. You are the founder for Compassion Focused Therapy, and here a lot of our audience here is yoga therapists. Would it be possible for you to just briefly describe what is compassion focused therapy and how is this science of compassion useful in these times?
Okay, so we developed compassion focused therapy because we found that when we were doing a therapy called cognitive behavior therapy, where you help people to identify thoughts that are associated with anxiety or depression and then come up with alternatives, we found that people could do it logically, but they couldn't generate supportive, compassionate, or kind tones to those thoughts. So they would have ways of trying to cope, you know, like I can do this, or I feel like I'm a failure, but really this is okay. But they would still talk to themselves in very hostile and aggressive ways. Come on, pull yourself together, you can do this, you know, that sort of thing. So we started to teach people to how to focus on, if you're struggling, if you're suffering, if you're depressed, if you're frightened, how can you create an internal sense of being cared about, a compassionate tone, a compassionate motivation to your difficulty. And what we found is a lot of our clients couldn't do it. And one of the reasons they couldn't do it is because when they tried to be kind and compassionate to themselves, it just made them feel worse. Now, the way to understand this is because what is in their memory systems for people who are depressed and so on are often memories of being unloved or unwanted. So for example, imagine that you like going on holidays. So you love holidays, holidays, great. When you think about a holiday, you feel good, yes, I'm getting a holiday. But then one day you go on a holiday and you get very badly beaten up and you're robbed and you end in hospital. How are you going to feel about holidays the next time when you're at home and you start to think about a holiday? So what would happen is not all those wonderful, lovely feelings, but now what will come to mind is the trauma that you had on holiday. Now it's the same when we do caring. If people have had experiences of not being cared for or feeling very lonely, when they start to engage with compassion, they can actually start to feel those feelings again. So sometimes helping people who have mental health problems, one of the things you have to do when you're developing compassion, helping them developing their inner compassion, is to start to deal with some of the difficulties they've had in the past, because you're opening up some of those emotional memories. So that's one of the aspects of the therapy. And then the second thing is that compassion is rooted in caring behavior. Now, caring behavior is very old. I mean, many animals care for their infants, don't they? They care for their young. And so we know that the body and the brain has all kinds of systems within it which are activated when we engage with caring behavior, okay? And those systems in your brain and your body, they are designed to help regulate you, to calm you down. So if you imagine a child who's very distressed, runs to mum, and mum says, oh, it's okay, I'll give you a calm, calms the child down. If you're struggling and you're upset about something, and your friend phones you up and says, don't worry, I'll come round to see you, we can chat to you about it. When you feel somebody cares about you, it calms you down. And that's because you've got real processes, real systems, real biology in your brain and body, so that when you're cared for, you calm down. So compassion uses those mechanisms in the brain and body. So when we're compassionate to ourselves, or when other people are compassionate to us, it calms us down. So you probably know, going into hospital, if you're very frightened, if the nurse smiles at you and holds your hand, this is going to be okay, we're here for you, that will calm you down, right? Whereas if they don't appear interested, then that's not so good. So this ability of caring and feeling cared for has very real effects in the body and the brain.
That's very interesting. I say that because now what the our guidelines that given us, that the government has given us, is that you can't touch anybody. So how do we activate those connection that you're talking about, the touch, the hug, the holding hand, if we are restricted with a 2-meter distance guideline and the threat is everywhere outside?
So the first thing is to be aware that, yes, that's true. So the first thing is we know how compassion evolved. How did it come into being? Why do we have a brain and a body that's capable of doing that? Now, we are different to other animals because we also have a capacity for thinking and intelligence and mindfulness. We have what we call knowing intentionality. So we can use our minds to direct compassion. As far as we know, no other animal can do that. There's no hospitals run by chimpanzees or zebras doing dentistry, as far as we know. I don't think there is. But we can, because we have this amazing mind. So we have to use our minds to bring compassion. And one of the ways in which we do that, of course, is by using technologies. Now, technologies are not anywhere near as good as a hug or a hand touch, but like we're doing now, we're using the technology to communicate. So you can see my face, I can see your face, we can smile at each other, we have friendly voice tones. So that's a little bit, it's not, a hug and a touch would be better, but keeping in contact with each other through our technologies, with our technologies, is extremely important. And even though we can't hug and touch, then we can still, even at 2 meters, we can still smile at people. We can still use a friendly voice, right? We can still show an interest in each other. How are you? How are you doing, right? So when you're standing in a queue, when you're 2 meters apart, you can still turn around and ask the person behind you or in front of you, how are you? How's it going? Take an interest in the people around you. So all of these things can be very useful.
That's true. Dr. Kaustubh, do you have anything to say? I remember once you told us in our lectures, your father said, no matter what asana practice you give, if you give an intention or if you present a relationship with each other, create a heart-to-heart connection with the other person, that practice is valid. That practice would work, and that's because of the care response that would begin with the patient or the student.
This is something that my father coined. He coined this term called the care response, because in science we have what is called the fight or flight response, and then there's also something that they researched with the breathing and they call the relaxation response. But what my father always talked about was that in the domain of healing, you can't really heal somebody without the care. We cannot make caring very technical. We cannot make healing very technical, like we say, okay, here's some drugs or here is a surgery or whatever. Everything has to be accompanied with some form of care. And that is precisely, I think, what is needed right now. I think the whole world needs more care now, and compassion and friendliness. And like Professor Gilbert was saying, I think sometimes we can even give care with just making eye contact. I see how many times when we travel in the past, people are not even looking at each other's faces. They're just looking at their handphones. They don't really care about another person. So by just looking at some other person, just eye to eye, it already, you can communicate that there is compassion to the other person. And perhaps you can also show your vulnerability and say, we're also open to receiving compassion. And I think we have to adapt to the times that we are facing, and there are various forms of showing compassion and care. And we have to use every possible avenue that we can.
Mm. Mm. That's brilliant. Thank you. The other thing I wanted to ask was these boundaries are being created from the quarantine method, and it's a form of, in public health, we're using this as a separation of safe space and unsafe space. And in Vedic culture, although epidemics were prevalent even in the Vedic times, there was this purification rituals that were being used to create this safe space and the boundaries. Is there a way? I know we need it. We only work on research and evidence-based theories, but is there a way that we can harness some of those purification rituals, or even other rituals that are offered within the Vedic culture, to manage the crisis we're in right now?
I think any of these traditional methods can be adopted as long as there is an openness in the heart. That's all is needed, because I don't think society faced different kind of problems then than now. We all had, disease is not new, it's very old. And the disease that is communicable is also not new, it's very old. So that's why they had procedures where they would have purification methods, both material and energetic and things like that, to make sure that they created some safe space for them to live. And we can always embrace those technologies today, even if we are living in modern times within this. All that is needed is an openness, that's all.
Mm. Professor Gilbert, do you have any suggestions or any reflections on that?
No, I agree entirely. I think that's excellent. Yes, I mean, I don't know what the rituals are, so I can't comment on the rituals. But I mean, I think what Kashu said was great. Yeah, great. Yeah, I go along with that.
I wanted to highlight something. We're living in a capitalist society, and I know I was listening to some of the lectures that you offered us on your website, and I will be I have a slide here with the links to that, so our audience can go into it as well. But Professor Gilbert, you mentioned something about the perfectionist mind of must have and the tyranny of the shoulds. And there is a dilemma now that we must be using a car, or we must be using all the natural resources that are killing the earth. What do you say? How do we deal with that dilemma now? The masturbation that you mentioned in your video, that's very fascinating. How do we come out of this lockdown, and what are the kind of code and ethics that we should follow so that we don't do this masturbations?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So there was a psychotherapist called Albert Ellis, and he pointed out that sometimes people have emotional difficulties because they feel they've got to achieve, you know, if I don't do well, nobody will like me. If I don't look attractive, nobody will like me. You know, if I don't pass my exams, I won't get a job. I have to work hard. I must get my qualifications. I must look nice. I must be attractive. So a lot of must and cravings and wantings and demandings, right? So that's what that's about. And that's partly to do with the fact we live in a very capitalist society, and we're being bombarded all the time with advertisements telling you you should need this, and you should have this, and you need a new car, and you need a new dress, and you need a new makeup or whatever. So we're caught up in a world of wanting, 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 wanting. One of the things that has to change, I think, when we come out of this lockdown is to begin to think about what actually is of value to us. What do we really value? Because it's very clear that over the last 20 years, we've been running down health services in many European countries and in America as well for tax cuts. to give people tax cuts. So we run our services, our health services, into the ground. And that's one of the reasons why we've got the problems we've got at the moment, because we just didn't have a health service that could cope. And many of the medical staff were saying over many years, look, if we get a pandemic, we're going to be broke. We're just not going to cope. You must build up our health services. So there are many, many aspects, but social care services, our education services, all of the services, police, all of them, they need to be properly funded. And in order to do that, we need to raise the funds to do that. So we've got to give up this me first, I want, it's mine. I don't want to have to pay taxes. I just want more money. We've got to change that to how do we make a contribution to the common good? How do we make a contribution so that we begin to build the society that we want? How do we build on the goodwill of people? Because there's been a lot of goodwill. I mean, a lot of people have been making some wonderful, trying wonderful ways to be helpful to other people. This is very, very, very important. So we want to carry that on, but we also need to make major changes in our politics so that we actually have a politics of caring and sharing, not a politics of a me first society.
So we're kind of going bottom up, so people are also giving, we want individual responsibility so that we don't have so many musts, and should, and then also from top down with the government, the institutions and the politics also coming in from that sort of, so it's like a collective approach that the new normal should take, of compassion, of respect for our of individual and collective responsibility.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And there is a beautiful tool within yoga philosophy that talks about pratyahara, right? Dr. Desikachar, can we harness that?
Sure. I want to say that one of the problems in our modern society, the capitalist-based society, is that we know the price of everything, but value of nothing. When you look at we can know the price of every object in this world through the apps that we have, whether it's Amazon or whatever, eBay or whatever. Every product is now bombarded on your apps, and everything has a price, and we can research the price which is cheapest, and we can buy from wherever we want. But we don't know the value of things, and that is the big problem, because we don't value our things, because we have been programmed now in the last at least 15-20 years to have a disposable relationship with objects because of planned obsolescence. We are throwing objects very easily to replace it with something else. When I was young and grew up in India, before all this capitalist society came out, we had one telephone that the entire family shared. We had one TV that the entire family shared. We had one fridge that and this was lasting for 20 years and 30 years. I mean, my father bought a fridge in the 1970s that was there with us till the, not a fridge, a phone in the 70s that is there till the 1990s. We didn't change. But now everybody is somehow programmed to change, whether it's their choice or not, because if you have an old phone, they make the software invalid or the parts invalid, that you're forced to buy something new. So we live in a very unreasonable society where we are not taught to value things. So when you keep disposing products, psychologically, it starts to create a kind of non-value relationship with that product. We don't miss it anymore. We don't value it anymore. And the same happens with people. That's what we do with the people as well. People become disposable. And that is why we don't even value people, value relationships and anything like that. And I think that is the basic problem, and we need to change that. And that's what the concept of pratyahara that you talked about is about. Sensory control is really asking ourselves, what is it that we need? Not what is it that we want, because our want will have never-ending list of things. I mean, nothing is going to satisfy our list of wants. But more importantly, what is it that we need in life? What is it that we value? I think that is the most key phrase for me, is things of value, people of value, rather than just innumerable number of things. And I think that is the thing that is the problem with our modern times. And I'm wondering whether it's even possible to reverse it in the near future. I wonder whether we need to suffer even more before humanity learns this. This is my reflection.
Mm. The yoga world knows about these limbs, but perhaps if we have the audience from psychotherapy world, we do have concepts of yamas and niyamas, which the West doesn't really know about, that these are also offered within the yoga philosophies. Can you just tell us, I think it ties quite nicely to pratyahara as well, and what you talked about, the values. Could you just describe those tools that we have within yoga philosophy? Yoga is not just physical postures and breathing exercises.
I think you are very right. It ties completely to what we've been discussing. I mean, because the platform for all the tools of yoga that is presented is what is called yama and niyama. That is the foundation, which includes very fascinating things like non-violence, for example. Non-violence not only to people we love, but also to ourselves or to nature, like if we are violent to nature, animals, plants, and things like that. So there is this concept called non-violence. That is the first thing. Then comes the concept of satyam, which I find it very difficult to translate into one English word, but I would say more like authenticity. Are we authentic, or are we living a lie? And that is where this concept fits in very well. What is it that we really want for our own self? What is it that we can afford? And that's the problem, because even many of the objects that we are forced to buy, we are buying on credit. Most countries are on debt. The debt of the world is about, last time I checked, was about $600 billion or something like that. A huge amount of debt we have, collective debt in the world. So that means overall we are spending more than we are earning. So that's not authentic, because in some way we are buying products that we don't need to impress people that we don't like with money we don't have. Basically, that's not authenticity. Satyam is a concept of being authentic in so many different ways. Then comes asteyam, non-stealing or non-coveting what belongs to other people, whether it's resources that we grab from one country to the other. And that's where the whole geopolitics of this world comes in, where a lot of the political things are basically grab for resources because we want resources of other countries that we don't have. Then comes what is called brahmacharya, which is fidelity, whether we are truthful, whether we are honest, whether our energies are directed in the right place. And finally comes aparigraha, how much we are grasping, in this world, more than what we can consume. That is what is the reality of today. So this is what is called the yamas. And then comes the niyamas, whether we have a purity of intention and thought of action. This is where all these concepts that Professor was talking about, compassion and all that, comes into place. Whether we're having pure intentions for ourselves and other people that we are interacting with in our life. When as a doctor, somebody is working to take care of the patient, are they looking at it as how can they help that person? Or how can we maximize profit from this person? What is the intention? That is what is shuchi or shaucha. Then santosha, contentment. We're always complaining about what we don't have. Why don't we take some moments to appreciate the things that we do have? That's something that is also essential in today's world. We have a lot of things. We are at the most successful period of history in the world. We are the most prosperous in the world at any point. Even the world's prosperity is so high. The world's educational level is so high. But we are not happy. We want more. So we are not content. Then comes tapas, the process of detoxification. We accumulate a lot of toxins, whether it's emotional toxins, psychological toxins, or physical toxins. Somehow we need to clean our system from all these things. Then comes self-inquiry, swadhyaya, where we need to ask ourselves, why are we here on this earth? What is our purpose of life? What are we meant to do? What is our reason why we are existing here? What is our self-value, self-worth, self-dharma, the purpose? All these questions that we ask ourselves and improve ourselves based on that. And the final thing is surrendering to a divine force, whether you call it in the name of a God or in the name of nature or anything like that, because we are not the masters of everything. We are not in control. We always have something which is beyond us, and that is something that we need to accept. So these are some essential things, and if we start integrating all this, I'm very sure that we will live a compassionate life. This is my belief and experience.
Thank you. Just taking on from that, Professor Gilbert, in your research papers on shame and people who have high shame and self-criticism, I probably would think that following any of these yamas and niyamas, they would kind of push themselves to ground if they are to believe with this moral ethics that we have to follow. How does compassion focused therapy help those people who want to follow the yamas and niyamas, but have proneness to shame and self-criticism? So they would probably bury themselves if they don't follow the yamas and niyamas.
Yes, so self-criticism is a way in which we try to, people often think self-criticism is a way of improving. You know, if I criticize myself, I'll make myself work harder or whatever it is. But it often doesn't work quite like that, because if you criticize yourself enough, you end up feeling quite bad about yourself. You know, you put yourself down a lot. So what we want is what we call compassionate self-correction, and that is learning how to pay attention to things. If you've made mistakes or you've gone wrong or you've hurt people, definitely pay attention to that because you want to correct that. But the way you correct it is to be encouraging, supportive, helpful, and compassionate. Okay, so recognizing that you might have made a mistake or you didn't achieve what you wanted to achieve, and then learning how to deal with that disappointment compassionately, rather than just getting angry with yourself, oh, I'm stupid, I shouldn't have done that, and all of that sort of stuff. So the self-criticism is very common in the West because people get frustrated with themselves and they think they should have done better, they could do better and stuff. But compassion is a way of actually dealing with disappointments and setbacks when we can't have what we want, or when we can't achieve what we want, or we make mistakes or we fail. Compassion will help you to face those life difficulties, whereas self-criticism will just make you, shaming yourself and criticizing yourself will just make you worse.
Mm. You mentioned, I think it's quite important to highlight between guilt and shame. Could you just explain the difference on where are the boundaries of guilt and where are the boundaries of shame? Okay,
so shame and guilt are often confused. So we have to think about where do they come from. So many animals, if a more dominant animal attacks a subordinate, they will show submissive behavior. Okay, that's submissive behavior because they know they're being attacked by a more dominant. So if you look at what happens when people feel ashamed, they do exactly the same. They put their heads down and they cover their face. You know, that's a shame kind of experience. They don't do that with guilt. So shame is really about the way you judge yourself and the way you think other people are judging yourself. Guilt, on the other hand, is related to if you've hurt somebody and you have an experience of sadness and remorse. Okay, so you don't do that when you feel guilty. You become open to trying to repair the damage, to apologize or whatever it is. So imagine two people have had an affair, right? Harry and Tom, and their partners discover it, and Harry thinks, oh no, I'm a bad person, I shouldn't have done that, and everybody will think I'm a bad person, and my wife will think I'm a bad person. Oh, I'm a bad person. So that's shame, okay? Because that's about me, and oh, me. Whereas guilt is about, oh, I didn't mean to hurt my partner. That my partner must be feeling really bad about what I've done. I need to take responsibility. I need to try to repair the damage. I feel so sorry for the harm I've caused. Now that is a guilt response. It's not about beating you up or attacking you. It's not all about you. It's about taking responsibility for what you've done and then trying to repair it. Now this is very important actually, because if you're dealing with people who have done bad things, like in prison, you just try and shame them, make them feel bad about themselves. That's not necessarily going to stop them from doing bad things in the future. But if you can help them experience guilt, so they experience genuine remorse and sadness for the harm they've caused, that's much more likely for them to stay on the straight and narrow, right? So shame is really from what we call the competitive system or the rank system, okay? Whereas guilt is from caring system. You feel guilt because you care. If you don't care, then you don't feel guilt. You can feel shame because people could attack you and you can feel, put down. But guilt is really about caring. It matters to you. If you've done something which has harmed somebody, then you will feel sorrow and remorse about that. So that's how we see guilt. Guilt is quite a useful thing. Of course, you can overdo it, but guilt is quite an important. Shame really doesn't do very much because it's all about just putting yourself down or thinking others are putting you down or you're bad or whatever it is. But guilt is quite an important emotion.
So what I hear is that guilt starting point is courage, actually, and starting point for shame is fear.
Yeah, that's right. It's a very good point. Very, very excellent point. Yeah.
Dr. Kaustubh, do you have any points on that or any reflections from that, from the yoga?
No, I think Professor covered it really very, very well. I don't think I have anything else to add. It's brilliant.
What I'm going to do now is I'm going to share the slide of the resources that the experts have offered free on their website. So here, if you would like to go into any of these talks that Professor Gilbert has just mentioned a little bit about, he's got it on. If you want to just, it doesn't have a link, so you can't press it, but if you can note it down, this is the correct one, Professor Gilbert, right?
Yeah, that's fine, yeah. If you just go to www.compassionatewellbeing.com, that will take you to the site.
Yes, and there are about 12 videos that you have offered where you've explained the science of compassion and you've gone quite in detail of it.
Yes.
So please, audience, if you would like to take that note, you can have that. And Dr. Kaustubh Desikachar is doing every single morning prayers in the form of chanting, where we collectively get together and we chant. And Dr. Kaustubh Desikachar gives us the meaning of those chants as well, and does the chanting as well. So you can join in that as well. And that is the website where you can sign in to get that as well. And I'm offering meditation sessions every Saturday morning, and Yoga Sutra, which is our core text, which I teach on Tuesday morning. So you can go onto my website and get that. So we're offering that. So now I'm going to get the floor open for questions from our audience. So if you could press, either you can unmute yourself or raise your hand and I'll unmute you. I can stop the share here and then get onto the gallery view. If you have any questions from the audience, I can't really see who's raising their hands. Don't know how that comes, but you can just put your hand up or unmute yourself. That's Sarah. Okay.
So I would like to ask both Professor Gilbert and Dr. Kaustubh, how do you go about helping someone who has perhaps lived for many decades disliking themselves, not being compassionate towards themselves? How do you help them begin to change?
You want a therapy? You'd like me to say how I would do it as a therapist?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the first thing is to realize that self-criticism can sometimes be defensive.
Yeah.
Now, I'll give you an example for this. You probably have heard of a society called the Aztecs. Now, the Aztecs used to sacrifice to their gods because they believed their gods could send the rains and help them, or they could punish them. So what would happen is they do all these sacrifices. But if in the next year the rains didn't come, what did they do? Well, they blame themselves. What have we done to upset you? Have we not sacrificed enough? What they didn't do is to get angry. Where's the rains? We sent up, give us the rains. We sacrificed you last year. Come on. You know. So we know then that when children are confronted with powerful others, particularly parents and so forth, they learn to self-blame in order to not be aggressive outward. So sometimes when people carry a lot of this criticism they won't let go of, it's because they're actually carrying a lot of unprocessed raging. They're raging inside. Okay, so that anger they feel towards themselves is partly to do because they haven't been able to do with the anger that they feel that people have hurt them. That's one aspect. So the key thing is when people won't move away from criticism, they're holding on to it for a reason. And as a therapist, you have to find out why they're holding on to it. Because if you don't get to the reason, if you don't find what's sitting underneath the criticism, they won't let it go. So that's quite important. And then some people can be very frightened to let go of self-criticism. Some people believe, well, I must be a little bit good because at least I know at least I criticize myself. At least I know I'm bad. So I must be, if I didn't criticize myself, then I'd be really bad. So there's all kinds of bits and pieces about why people hold on to self-criticism, and it's discovering their reasons, which sometimes are unconscious to them. They're not fully aware of it. So that's the big trick, if you want to call it a trick, for people who are really clinging on to self-criticism, come what may. They have to, because they're very frightened to let it go. And finding out what the fear is. What are you so frightened about of actually saying tomorrow, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to criticize myself anymore. I'm just going to be an ordinary person with my fallibilities. What would really frighten that person about doing that? What would really worry you? What stops you from doing it? It's in that stopping is where the secret often is.
Thank you.
Dr. Kaustubh, would you want to say something about that to Sarah's question?
I think the approach is very, very similar. It's, in my experience, what I've seen is that there's always some kind of an origin to this self-criticism, which is basically somehow maybe the person was not appreciated if he or she was not a good girl or a good boy or something like that, or good enough or something like that. So, and there is not the space for freedom of expression. So it comes from definitely the word is absolutely right about domination or authority or something that is like a lid that has been put on a whole bunch of emotions or feelings or actions where there was not the freedom to be who they were and things like that. So in the way that we work with yoga is to allow them this free space to express all these unresolved emotions and hold them. So to acknowledge that it's okay to feel this way, it's okay that they have these kind of feelings that have been coming from the past, repressed from the past, and it's okay to express. And I think that is the biggest fear that a lot of people have, is to even talk about what is it that they are suppressing. That's a very big problem I've seen with a lot of people, is they don't even want to share what is it that they are suppressing that is making them feel so bad. And I think giving a safe space for them to express it is the beginning of their journey. This has been my experience with a lot of students who are often criticizing themselves. And sometimes this process is not easy. And for the therapist as well, because maybe there's a whole bunch of things that comes out, but we have to have that strength to hold it without any judgment.
Mm.
It's interesting. I want to ask you a question, because a lot of these pains are held in the body. And sometimes, you know, when you say to people, what would stop you appreciating your own goodness? If you allowed yourself to think of yourself as lovable, why would that worry you? What is upsetting about feeling your own lovability, feeling your own goodness? And then if they crack, they just go into sobbing. They just sob. I mean, it's like the body just releases, you know, I've always wanted to feel loved. I've never felt loved. I've always felt so alone. I've always felt so alone in the world, never good enough. And then it, whoa. So that's a lot of body work. I'm quite interested in the yoga, how you use the body to release these emotions, particularly this deep, deep loneliness some of these people have.
Well, I think this is where we have a different range of techniques. Sometimes we are doing different body positions because you may see that there is certain constriction that unconsciously is created where they are holding it in their heart. So the whole upper body becomes very closed. And so when we are doing certain positions that are opening that place, the what you call the repressed emotions or whatever, the gateway to that opens and all these things comes out. So sometimes it's lies in the good observation of where is it that they feel that constriction in the body, because you're absolutely right, because all of these feelings that they are suppressing or repressing locates itself into some part of the body, and physically the body feels that, they carry that. It could be the lower back, it could be the neck and shoulder, it could be in the chest, in the heart, it could be in the belly. So sometimes this is what happens. I remember one time teaching a class where one student had had so much constipation for many, many years. And there was a lot of tightness, obviously, in the belly region. So there is some asana, that posture that we call apanasana, that I was teaching this person. And it's not the first time this person was doing it, but in the class, when one day when this person did, there was a sudden a sound like a little pop, and immediately the person started bursting into tears. So much of the feeling, like exactly we're saying, oh, I was never loved, I was never cared, and I was this and I was that, everything started coming out. From the next day onward, this person had no more constipation ever. Ever. And this is remarkable that body holds. And that's why in my experience, and I say this is my experience, I don't say that it is the fact, I've seen that most of the people who at least come to me for yoga or yoga therapy are people who have a lot of psychosomatic issues, and most of the illnesses that they carry, there's a connection between the body and all of these emotions that have not yet been resolved. And so through certain postures, through certain breathing, through certain chants, we are reaching these gateways where they are holding these so-called traumas, and we are gently opening it and providing a free space for them to express. That's the key thing. We need to create a free space for them to express these things, because in the past, many of them could not even express these feelings freely. And I think that is where a compassionate space for them to express whatever it is without judgment is absolutely necessary.
Because I think a lot of Western psychology are moving in your direction very much, of actually how do we use the body to release emotions. So yeah,
we are waiting for you guys for the last 2,500 years. For the last 2,500 years, please catch up. We are
slow learners.
Our door is open. We have an open door policy.
I think this, just a brief comment on that. I find this is where the teenage problems, teenagers don't really want to talk much. And that's where the talk therapy sometimes doesn't work, and yoga therapy can come in and supplement that. Because teenagers really don't like discussing their problems, but they don't mind doing postures. And somehow we can create that opening, that release through the body, then they can move into a space where they can express. So it could be the starting point for the teenage adolescent times where we can help them release that bottled up things.
Yes, and it's the most fascinating thing, because most of the teenagers, they don't feel safe to share their feelings to the parents. And very often there is dysfunctional families where there is separated families. And so the child often is getting trapped in the middle of the two parents and cannot really feel free with either of them. So they hold a lot of it. And that's why if you look, many of them, they collapse around their heart region. They collapse their shoulders, everything is collapsed, and they come into that kind of a position. It's very fascinating. All over the world, it's not just in one country.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Is there any, I don't know where this raising hand sign is. Is there anybody else who can raise their hands and show me that they have a question? And then I'll unmute you if you have any more questions.
In the participant, there is a raise hand button.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but I can't really see it.
I mean, while you're doing that, Peter, one of the interesting things is that one of the most important problems that we experience, rooted deep in many, many psychological difficulties, is this experience of disconnection, a deep inner loneliness, a sense of separateness. And again, I'm kind of interested in how we can use the body to kind of connect to that, because that underpins a lot of mental health difficulties, the sense of disconnectedness. If you ask people who are panicking, do you feel connected or alone, they'll say alone. If you ask depressed people, do you feel connected or alone, they'll say alone. If you ask paranoid people, do you feel connected or alone, they'll say alone. So the issue of this deep sense of disconnectedness was really very important, and how you work with the body on those processes of connectedness I'd be very interested to hear how you see that.
You can put your questions on the chat box if you want. We've got another 5 minutes before we sign off.
Nina has a question. You can just unmute her because she
Who
raised
does?
her.
Sorry?
Somebody called Nina, I think.
Ah, okay, brilliant.
Nina.uk@bt.
Yes. Hi, Nina.
Hi there. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to add to this because I worked as a clinical psychologist, and I trained as a mindfulness teacher and a compassionate teacher as well. I'm a yoga teacher, and I remember when I worked in acute mental health services, I noticed this connection between emotion and body really clearly. And often people felt very ungrounded, very fearful, and I remember in my one-to-one session with somebody in particular, where I just instinctively felt that working close to the ground get to be really helpful. And I think that contact with the earth, you were talking about the nature at the beginning with the beautiful chant, this sense of connecting isn't just within ourselves and moving to those areas within us which are difficult and perhaps have been buried for a long time. And we proceed with the unraveling of that very gently. But to me, there also seemed to be this real sense of safeness just by the sheer contact of lying on the ground and working close to the ground and breathing, and a sense of then gradually regulating the nervous system. So for me, there was this interplay of working therapeutically, but also there was a sense of training that was coming from that person themselves. And I wondered, Professor Gilbert, if you had anything to share about the fact that we're seeing this rise in mindfulness within the therapeutic communities, but we're also seeing it with other people offering mindfulness training as a teaching platform. And if you had any thoughts to kind of share on that, really, in terms of safety for the person that is receiving that that support in the medium of, sort of therapy and as a course.
What, in terms of doing mindfulness, do you mean?
Yes.
Yes, well, I think the point you make is a very, very important one, and that is that mindfulness is very important, very useful, but how we use the body. I mean, we use the body in terms of helping people learn certain breathing techniques to get the vagus nerve going and so forth, and how to ground in the body, to experience the body gradually slowing down and becoming slightly heavier in the body as you breathe slower and deeper and so forth. But I think there's an awful lot more we could learn from the yoga traditions about using the body to support the mind, because they're obviously interacting, but no, the only way that we do it at the moment is with mostly the Drew yoga, or this opening up the chest to allow the diaphragm to do the breathing, doing the 5 breaths per minute, slightly longer out breath, focusing on the sensation of body slowing down with the breath. Sometimes 1 or 2 movements, like like in Tai Chi, move the concept of balance, moving from one balanced position to another balanced position. But I mean, I think we're still very early days compared to what some of the yoga masters have been doing for, as Dr. Kashu said, thousands of years. We're still very early days for us.
So do you think, Professor Gilbert, there is a way that you could integrate Vini Yoga into compassion-focused therapy, or compassion-focused therapy gets integrated into Vini Yoga?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're very interested in all that. I mean, the main problem for us is finding, and the same for you, I suppose, on your side of things, is trying to find colleagues who are interested in collaborating and will do it. But yes, very much so. We do have.
I would be.
Yeah, we do have colleagues. Well, just contact me. We do have colleagues like Deirdre Fay, you probably know, does a lot of yoga with. No, we'd be delighted to do that.
Excellent. Dr. Kaustubh, do you have anything to say to Nina's comments and reflections?
I think what I want to say is that the way yoga and Ayurveda and other things are looking at is that disease itself is a state of disconnection. And that is basically disconnection to our body, disconnection to the nature, the environment we are living in, disconnection to people. Basically, that is the basic definition of disease, vyadhi, which is defined as a state of disconnection. So if we are disconnected from the body, and this is very common now with teenagers because they are body shamed. If they are fat, they are saying you are fat and you are ugly. If they are skinny, you are saying you are skinny and ugly. If your nose is crooked, your eyes are crooked, your color of the hair should be this, your color of the hair. So we start shaming young people from that age, and it continues. This shame thing continues for so long. It's going to be, they're going to be disconnected from the body. They don't want to accept what they have. They want to have something different. And the same thing with nature. We are so disconnected from nature. People in hot countries like mine want AC to make it cooler. People in cool countries like yours want to make it hotter. So we are living out of season as well. I mean, we don't enjoy the season that we have. We eat the food that is not from the season, that is not. So there's so much disconnection that is happening. And I think that is why being with nature, like these ideas like lying on the nature, lying on the floor, touching the trees, touching water, touching rocks, is very helpful for the kids to somehow calm their nervous system down and ground them. And I think that is a very starting point. But the more important thing is, as family members, as members of society, we should stop shaming people on various levels and encourage connection rather than disconnection. Do anything that will promote connection rather than promote disconnection. That's very, very important. And comparison is one of the problems. You're not like that person is not like you, you should do better than this person in school. Things like that creates disconnection.
Yeah.
Thank you. We've got one more question, and before we finish off, question to Professor Kaustubh. We've been in a state of pratyahara. How we can maintain ourselves in control of our senses? During Corona, of course, everything has been restricted to us. This is from Al-Hadra studio, that says.
It's Maria Alejandra from Colombia. This lady is asking from Colombia. I think we are not in pratyahara right now. We are somehow forced not to have access to products. I don't know about your countries where you are, but in India, you cannot buy anything essentials. That's all we can buy. So this is not pratyahara. Pratyahara is to have a restraint in the presence of objects. You don't want to get drawn by that. There is a sense of mastery. So for example, if I want to stop smoking, if I stay away from cigarettes, that is not sensory control. That's running away from the object. The more important thing is, if the cigarette is in front of me, I'm not tempted to take it. That is pratyahara. So that is, for that, we need to discipline the mind, certainly. And that's where we in yoga talk about things like meditation as a way to engage with pratyahara. Probably in the modern language, we are using methods like mindfulness, etc. So somehow we need to have some kind of discipline for the mind in order for the senses to be disciplined, because mind is the master of the senses. From the point of view of yoga, mind is the master of the senses. So if you don't discipline your mind, you can't discipline your senses.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. We have some more questions, but I can't take them on because we've run out of time. But before I finish off, I'd like to just, if we can just intentionally send our breath to all the people who are in the hospital at this time who can't breathe. And I'll finish off with a peace chant, mantra. Thank you. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you very much. And please visit the websites that I have offered. I will put those slides again. And thank you so much for everybody for joining us here today. And thank you especially, and I'm ever so grateful to Professor Gilbert and to Dr. Desikachar for your time here. And wishing everybody good health and calmness.
Thank you, and nice to meet you, Professor.
And nice to meet you, Doctor. Yes, nice to meet you. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank
We are waiting for you.
I'll just put the slides up for the website if you want to have one more chance to look at the website. Please visit and join the beautiful chants that we do in the mornings with Dr. Kaustubh and the amazing conversations and lectures by Professor Gilbert on his website. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Before actually we go, I'll unmute everybody and you can just say bye, hello, just so we can connect to each other.
Yeah.
Unmute all, and at the same time, it leaves a very nice energy. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for organising this, Vidhi, as well. Thank you. It's the first time I've joined, and I've really much.
Yeah.
My son's taken away the parasol, so I can't see.
All right, I'm going to switch this off now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
The slide.